And we are live. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest.
And
And
hello.
hi, Mike. And I'm having issues with very ineptly experimenting with all these different.
No, Chuck, I don't think it's that. I think that they are trying to stop you.
They, the proverbial they.
They are trying to stop.
Yes, it's this great they out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can only do what I can do. I mean, recently a relative of mine was telling me, the world is coming to an end because of AI. It's going to destroy the planet. And I mean, I think a lot of younger people think that, and I just can't live like that. I can't be that pessimistic. There's nothing I can do about it. If it is, then it is. I remember when I was growing up, the big threat was a nuclear bomb dropped by the Ruskies. You remember that?
Yes. Yes, and I remember vividly in high school doing the drop drill. You probably didn't do that.
Duck and cover, right?
Yeah, so you'd hide under your desk to protect yourself from the nuclear bomb.
Right, and I remember like having these long conversations with my brother when we were just 6, 7, 8 years old, and we were like fascinated by, oh my God, the world could blow up. The Russians are going to drop, and eventually you have to realize that if that is true, there's not a damn thing any of us can do about it.
I mean, the other thing is that there's nothing new under the sun. That's what's so great. Most people don't remember that in the year 999. There was this huge thing about, oh man, the year 1000, it's all going to fall apart. Yeah, it's all over. It's all over.
I remember that one. I remember at the time I was on the American Freedom Network. So every day we were hearing from people. I mean,
yeah, what I said, 999, that happened.
Oh, yeah.
999.
999. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you were about the Y2K.
No. The Y2K, the most ridiculous thing, we heard from every customer and every vendor, are you prepared for Y2K? And the one that I think I laughed for the entire afternoon, showed it to everybody in the factory. We're dealing with a hospital, and they came out with the Y2K protocol for their laundry department. Apparently, laundry is affected by Y2K.
Yeah.
And
well, I just remember that I was on the American Freedom Network at the time, and it scared the bejeebers out of all of us. I mean, guest after guest selling toilet seat covers and batteries and, Berkey heaters and all this survivalist stuff, by the way, which is actually, in retrospect, not a bad thing to have. But there was that, and there was all these predictions. And the one prediction they did have that turned out to be absolutely right was a lab leak of a biological weapon that is going to kill millions of people, which, that turned out to be true. But the thing is that I recall at the time, I mean, when I was on that network, we had just had our baby, and I was like a new father. And I just felt like, I can't live like this in this kind of pessimism where I feel like the world is coming to an end any minute, because even if it were true, there's not a damn thing I personally can do about it. All I can do is maybe alert people and talk about plans. But in the bigger picture, you and I mean, if the Ruskies are going to drop the nuke, or if artificial intelligence is going to destroy the planet, there's not much that we can do about it.
Well, what do you mean? You do what they always did. Get a placard and go to a protest.
Right. And having said that, there are things that we can do. I mean, in a sense,
I was being sarcastic.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You can go to the protest, doesn't do anything. The ban the bomb, all this stuff. It's that the most amazing thing is to watch the reaction of people during a total solar eclipse. Okay? And for a brief moment in time, they realized, hey, you know what? The moon got in front of the sun, and there's not a goddamn thing we can do about it. And you know what? If the moon decides to just stop there and blot out the sun, well, you're SOL, and there's nothing you can do, right?
That's exactly, and that's the conclusion I eventually came to. And Having said that, there are things that can be done. Like for example, there are people who are stopping the flock cameras by protesting them and becoming aware publicly of the danger of the surveillance state. And there are steps that can be taken. I mean, maybe ultimately it could be like the Ayn Rand answer in the novel Atlas Shrugged. I don't know if you've read that.
Yeah, yeah.
Where they basically retreat to Atlantis somewhere in the Colorado Alps, the Colorado Rockies. Maybe that they just dropped out and then created a new society where you're going to have the whole damn thing happen again. But the point is that things can be done. I mean, it was the Canadian truckers who stopped the digital passports, the health passports, which were being rolled out at the time by the World Economic Forum and the entire international establishment and Fauci and all the rest. And it would have been basically that you'd have to have this digitized passport, which could have who knows what on it, in order to get food, and you'd have to like zip it, and that goes eventually to what Alex Jones, I think, accurately talked about, which is an implant in your body that would be computerized and digitized, and that would allow you, to move. And this flock thing is like that in that it looks at your car, and now they're finding all these people who are using it to spy on their boyfriend or whatever, and people are protesting. But the Canadian truckers stopped the digitized passport. If it wasn't for them, we probably would have that today.
Well, did you, you don't hear much about this now, but were you dismayed by how easily 99% of the people went along with this?
Yes, it was, and they still are. People are still like drinking the Kool-Aid about, the vaccine and Fauci and the lockdowns. And it's almost a cult. And that, I think they do it all the time.
It's a big cult.
And I think they're nostalgic for it. They love the feeling. There was nothing that we saw in our lifetime closer to a socialistic takeover of the world than that. And I mean, and it was even worse in some countries like Australia, for example, and New Zealand, where they were setting up concentration camps for people who were were vaccine dissidents, because you're going to die unless you have the vaccine.
Did you ever think about the very uncomfortable fact that the worst offenders in towing the line were British Commonwealth countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and you thank God every day that we revolted.
Yeah, and there were some countries that you think were very socialistic, like Sweden, that didn't buy it at all. They happen to have a government there that was like, no, we're not doing any of this. They took some reasonable precautions, like this country should have taken, like protecting nursing homes, for example, which this country didn't do. Instead, you had the blue states putting COVID-19 people into nursing homes so they could gin up the numbers. In Sweden, they protected the elderly and the people that have pre-existing conditions, and they didn't allow for massive, large crowds. Other than that, they did nothing, and they didn't have any more numbers in terms of COVID infection than any other country. They probably had less. But to get back to, I wanted to talk about the Lindsay Clancy case, because that's happening right here in Boston. But before I do, I want to mention that my new course at ASU is religion and religion and politics. And this professor is a real Trump-hating left-winger.
What? A Trump-hating left-winger at a university? Come on.
It's the fact, it bothers me that, obviously I'm older, but most of the students are probably just getting out of high school, or they're young people, and they're impressionable, and they're going to take this stuff in like it's gospel. And the thing that I'm going to probably comment on this once I get to that part of the course, but his comments about 9/11, for example, he said that in the aftermath of that, the problem was a rise in Islamophobia. Not the fact that there was, he looks at it as this isolated incident when in fact it was part of a long series of radical Islamic terror instances that go back to the 70s and that continued to this day. It wasn't just a one-off. But he complains about that it resulted in a rise of Islamophobia by right-wing Christian groups who are just as bad because they're also into violence and extremism.
Such as?
Well, obviously, this is like delirious. First of all, I mean, exactly. I mean, that's going to be my point. I mean, and he says, and not all Islamic groups are into this thing, which shows it's not really Islamic. Excuse me, but
see, here's the problem with that that's been articulated by people like Bridget Gabriel. Okay, let's assume that it's only 10%.
Yeah, 10% is like
100-something billion people.
Yeah, exactly, and also, I mean, the other problem is that much of the rest of the Islamic world has not really stood up and condemned it, or really, and I suppose you could chalk that up to like a kind of a Stockholm syndrome situation, in that like most Germans were not Nazis, but they didn't really stand up to it, and most Russians were not communists.
Well, right, but let's make a distinction here, which is important. It's true that not only most Germans weren't Nazis, in the major cities, with some exceptions, obviously, in Germany, there was not great support, especially in Berlin. Okay, here's the difference. And this was a stunning experience that I had that unfortunately most Americans haven't. There was a little computer store close to my business back in the 1990s, early 2000s, that was operated by this Egyptian couple. The guy looked normal. The woman was fully clothed in the burqa, blah, blah, blah. They decided that they knew I was Catholic, so they invited me to high tea at their home. Now, here was this very nice, polite couple. Behind closed doors, my friend, the only difference between them and the 9/11 conspirators were they weren't actually flying the planes. They were standing on the sidelines cheering. And that's the fact. That's the difference. The problem with most Muslims is if they're not doing the terrorism, they're not against it.
Well, that's right. No, that's right. And also it so happens that a very nice young California couple in San Bernardino, one day they took their babies and they brought them over to the neighbor so they could be babies, they could have a babysitter, and they went to her place of employment and they blew it up with machine guns, and they killed, I think, half a dozen people. So, that's something that, for him to say, well, this isn't an Islamic situation, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that most Muslims are going to do this, but it's a little, and that we're homophobic because right-wing groups are upset about Muslim populations in this country. First of all, not all immigrant groups are the same. There's always some concern when there's a new immigrant group, but that most of them turn out fine. I'll give you the example of the Vietnamese. After the fall of South Vietnam, you had the boat people, and this country welcomed in upwards of 1 million Vietnamese refugees. Right. And there might have been some concern, I suppose, at first, but they've turned out to be the most patriotic and productive of Americans. No one is questioning that. I mean, it's not an issue of homophobia. I mean, homophobia. Well, that's another subject. It's not an issue of Islamophobia. People have legitimate concerns about Islamic immigration and their ability. Every immigrant group is different, and that they are not really appearing to be interested in acclimating, assimilating into American life.
Well, why don't you confront the professor with the simple question: why is his brain so small that he has to view everything in the world with this dialectic? between the victim and the oppressor. Okay. And here's the other question. Exactly what is wrong with homophobia or Islamophobia? All
right. It's a legitimate concern. And by the way, in that context, I would suggest that the American people and Europeans and Westerners have actually been surprisingly tolerant toward Muslims, given the fact that there are these terrorist instances that seem to pop up every Christmas when you have somebody drive a truck into a Christmas parade in Germany, or given the rape gangs, or given the fact that they've isolated themselves in the no-go zones. People are actually fairly tolerant about it so far. So there really isn't an issue of Islamophobia.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I saw this dialectic mentality on the right a little bit with the horrible Hugh Hewitt, who's just such a moron.
Yeah.
And I remember I called into his show, making some complaints against the positions of your friend Lieberman. All right. Mm-hmm. He immediately framed this as, gee, I'm being anti-Semitic.
So criticizing Joe Lieberman?
Because I was criticizing a Jewish guy.
Right.
And I said, isn't that a bit simplistic, Hugh? I can't criticize a guy because he's Jewish.
Well, first of all, you were criticizing Judaism. I mean, it wasn't. That's so crazy.
No, but it's like such a dumb way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And, it's one of the consequences, unfortunately, of the Civil Rights Act, that apparently all black people are perfect. You can't criticize them.
Right.
And now, apropos my current article, I mean, women, you can't criticize women. They all have to be empowered, and that's it. So
right, and you can't criticize transsexuals. But no. It's idiotic in that this professor goes on and says that after the 9/11, the right wing, quote unquote, they began to criticize Muslim nations. First of all, that's not even true. I mean, was people criticizing Egypt or Indonesia? No, I mean, they were criticizing radical Islamic nations that were behaving in an aggressive way, like Iran or Yemen. I mean, or groups. It wasn't this idea. I mean, nobody's criticizing Albania. It's a majority Muslim nation. It's ridiculous. I mean, you're right. It gets into this weird dialectic where everything has to be so categorized and there's no nuance to it. He complains about lack of nuance when people examine Samuel Huntington's accurate social theory, which is, the clash of civilizations. He says, oh, well, it lacked nuance. Really? I mean, first of all, Samuel Huntington's theory was, I think, quite accurate. He pointed out that you have the West, you've got the Christian West, you've got the Islamic world, and you've got the communist world headed by China, that these are separate civilizations and that they are clashing. That doesn't mean, their criticism of Huntington, and in the case of this professor, he also says this, is that it lacked nuance because not all Christian groups are the same, not all Muslim groups are the same. Sure, no one's saying they are, but his lack of nuance when it comes to his own dialectic is really astonishing. I mean, that everything has, and then he goes on to say that, in the United States, we had Islamophobia as expressed by a certain political figure, namely Trump, who brought up what he called birtherism. That's Islamophobia for him. And the Muslim ban, which, by the way, has been debunked. I mean, that was another one of these conspiracy theories put out by Trump's enemies, because the banning of several nations, which is something that every president has done, going back to George Washington, that's foreign policy. It was a group of 7 nations, 3 of which were not Muslim. And secondly, the big Muslim nations like Indonesia and like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they were not banned. What was banned was Yemen, and it was a temporary ban because of terrorism. They were harboring enemies of the United States, and they wanted to be extra careful for them flying into this country. And perfectly normal. I mean, we banned flights from Nazi Germany in World War II. I mean, it's like that's foreign policy. But of course, they demonize it and they said, "Oh, this is Islamophobia."
Well, here's it. Yeah, the trouble is there's no easy way to fix it. Okay, who is this professor? He's probably someone who's a quote unquote good student in high school, model
Right.
UN, all this stuff that we've talked about so many times. So he lives in this rarefied existence, in this case in Tempe, where he's never really had a real job. And being a professor is not a real job.
Right.
So he's able to engage this fantasy, and he never has any contradiction. First of all, as he's dealing with kids for the most part,
Yeah.
who, even if they wanted to contradict him, won't, because they want to get the grade.
That's right.
So this is completely contrary to the real world. Okay, if I'm in the real world and I come up with a product that no one wants to buy, well, then the marketplace has spoken, right? But in college, it doesn't work that way. You get to, be a Howard Zinn for your entire life, and it's pathetic.
Yeah.
But there you go, and it's probably difficult for you as someone older than 30 to have to be in this environment.
Well, I mean, to me, it's interesting because it not only reflects his view, and I think a predominant view in universities right now, which is why they're shrinking, but also the entire establishment, left establishment, at some level, just like you were saying that this Islamic couple that you went to their house, that they were just as radical as the 9/11 hijackers in private. The same thing is true. This is an insight into the private minds of much of our liberal establishment, this professor. This is what they really do think. I know this. I've seen it. I'm in it. I mean, I know people, who are very much a part of this. It's the same group that is part of the COVID cult. They're authoritarian minded. They're not nuanced. They don't have real life experience. Most of them are like this guy Hassan Piker or whatever his name is, trust fund baby who was brought up, wealthy. I mean, all these guys. Take a look at their backgrounds. A lot of the DSA people, they're all like, left types. I mean, recently this election in Michigan with this guy El Sayad, who were his supporters? Liberal, predominantly women's, white, suburban, highly educated, college credentialed people, not working people, not blacks, by the way, not inner city people, not blue collar people, not people who actually work for a living. That's their base is that, and that's the whole base of the Trump haters. It's and they're going to destroy this country, and they don't care.
Why? Isn't it interesting that these people are always the poster children for the movement? You look at, who better typifies it than John Ossoff in Georgia?
Oh my God!
Here's a guy that never had a job, was from a very wealthy family, never has really done anything in his entire life, but now they're setting him up as kind of the white Obama, if you will.
Yeah.
And he starts this, he didn't start this rumor. It was on Blue Sky, this nonsense between Trump and Natalie Harp.
Right. Oh yeah, he's like going down to the gutter. Him and here in Boston, we have Seth Bolton, who's into this. Really nasty kind of personal attacks on Trump. And he's the Epstein, he's a pedophile, this kind of stuff. And he's another one of these. I mean, the fact that he was in the military is as big. He says, well, I served the country. So he's got that going. Okay, I'll grant that.
But, well, you gotta take a bit of that with a grain of salt. All right. That the military isn't what it once was. I think, to be frank, I think it was always overrated. But that's a story for another.
Well, you can have a situation like Al Gore, who I think he served for 4 months and he was protected. Yeah. They kept him because he was the senator's son. They didn't really, he just kind of was like kept and sheltered. I mean, not to criticize someone's military experience.
No, but unfortunately, Chuck, you're seeing too much of this. There's this guy that's in the LA Times at least twice a week named John Duffy, and who has this vague background as a naval officer, whatever the hell that means.
Right.
And he's constantly criticizing Trump, but oddly, not the military. Somehow, and well, sometimes the military, they did this wrong, you did that wrong, and so on. And I can say this because I was an officer for, there's no details.
Right.
It really, unfortunately, isn't what it was.
No, and I mean, I suppose they can use it as a selling point. That's how they try to sell Tim Walz. Remember, the military, even though he skipped out just before the Iraq incursion. He decided he would resign. But getting back to
that was blatant, and they should have known that. That gee, what is someone going to research this and see?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that Nick Shirley had it right when he said that it's interesting that the minute Walz was picked by Harris, he came up with an unprecedented amount of money, something like, I don't know, $30 million. Where did he get that money? We know that it's probably connected to this. I mean, everything seems to go back to Minnesota, right? I mean, the corruption of the daycare centers and all of that. I mean, it seems that way. There's no proof, but it does raise questions. Getting back to the subject at hand, I mean, just to wrap it up with this professor, it's an insight into the mind of the American left establishment that they would. I mean, it's outrageous that he's willing to downplay the attack of 9/11 and claim, oh, this is just an isolated incident and it was not really Islamic, and that the real problem is equally implying that there are Christian groups. Like who? That's right. I mean, I'd like him to name one.
Well, that would be my first reaction. But then put yourself in that position, though. Let's say you're sitting in that lecture hall, and they make some outrageous statement. So me being a smartass since the day I was born, I'd probably be the guy that said, like who? And there'd be a nervous reaction. And then I realized, well, I just screwed myself in this class. So what's the point? It's too bad. As you say, this whole academic thing is starting to fall apart, finally. But it's going to be decades before the real reckoning.
Right. But the whole rotten edifice is starting to hemorrhage. There are people, enrollment is down. There's people getting laid off, and the whole, they're going to have, even like, I mean, sociology, I think, has recognized that there are some colleges now, including Boston University, which has downgraded sociology as not even a regular department any longer. It's more like, it's kind of a certificate, or it's an elective. And that younger people.
That must hurt. I mean, imagine being a true believer.
Yeah, and also all of the so-called studies, people aren't doing it, and it's so it's worthless, but it's also so highly politicized. And as far as sociology goes, because that's going to be my degree, it's actually too bad because sociology itself is an interesting and important subject. It just needs to be balanced. You need to have the courage to do a sociological look at the left, to do like a survey of societies, of all types, not just, that's, from a left perspective. But they don't do that. So the whole thing has been tainted, probably always was, and it's corrupted. But let's talk about the Lindsay Clancy case. I'm not following it closely, but my initial reaction to it, from what I can tell, is that the one group and the one element that is not being discussed is the fact that she was put on something like 8 different controlled substances, and that every time she was saying
simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, look, she says, I'm having trouble dealing with reality here. I mean, I'm hallucinating. I'm having terrible thoughts. They put her on another drug on top of the one she was already on.
Well, I did in doing that article. You may have been one of the few people that clicked on that graphic, which listed all these drugs. and the prescriber, by the way. All right. So let's take a look at that, because I went into some detail. First of all the prescribers were women. Just I'm sure a coincidence. All right. So my wife actually, after reading that article, said, I don't understand. And ironically, her father was a psychiatrist of the old school before all these drugs. And well, she asked me, what doctor would be stupid enough to pile on these antipsychotic drugs? There's no precedent for this. You don't know what the combined side effects are. And I said, well, I actually looked into it. I went in and I looked up all these doctors, right? Here's who they all were. The same stereotype. They were young women who undoubtedly were these daddy's girl favored types. They were good students and they did what they were told. And by God, if you go to med school, I'm telling you, if you counter the drug companies, it ain't going to do well for you.
Right.
My own son, when he was in his last year of med school, they brought in some representative touting some cardiac drug. Now, the advantage my son had, he already had a PhD in neurology. So he looks at this, quote, research that was presented. And my son starts asking this guy questions. And the guy got very uncomfortable because he was just a shill, right? And evidently what he did, he complained to the dean of the med school. Who the hell is this guy? So, and that was very unusual. So the problem is that this girl was a good student, the doctor, the one that prescribed the most of them, was doing what she should. And let's face it, if you have a psychiatric condition, we're just going to give you more and more and more and more drugs. Never mind the fact that the known side effects of these drugs are suicidal ideation, homicidal, all this stuff that came out.
And it actually says that on the fine print on the label. It's not even, they admit that. And in fact, when they run these commercials on TV, the side effects are blah, 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 and death, whatever. They have like a long list of things. So they do, it's fairly open what the side effects are. And to give this woman these kinds of dosages, I mean, it has everything to do with all of the stuff going on, including, I would argue, certainly 90% have been proven, but I would say all of these school shootings and these, acts of violence.
Every one of these kids was on drugs. Every single one.
On all of this. And I think that even the psychiatric establishment now has recognized it, and they have drawn it back. They're still doing it, but it's not as bad as it was in terms of just handing the stuff out like candy. Ritalin was the gateway, and that was a drug that was repurposed. It was originally, I think, for elderly people. And my brother's stepson, who told me that Ritalin was the gateway drug for him. And I remember at the time when they put him on it, I said, you really, to my brother and his wife, you should try something else. And they told me to mind my own business.
Oh, yeah.
And this young guy ended up having a lifetime of addictions and problems. He ended up finally dying, unfortunately, from fentanyl overdose. 2 years ago, it ruined his mother's life.
Well,
he couldn't get out from under because he started out with the Ritalin, and he was a nice guy. We all loved him. He was just a great kid, great looking kid, and just smart. And I'd have great conversations with him about history. But he just couldn't get out from under this demon that had been introduced into his life.
It's very hard to get off these antipsychotic meds. And, on a personal basis, my late father-in-law, who was an old school psychiatrist, this guy, by the way, was the smartest person you'd ever want to meet, right? As I tell my grandkids, he never got a grade lower than A from kindergarten through med school. All right. But his problem was that when all this drug stuff first started blossoming in the late 1960s, he was fighting against it. And he was a big deal guy within his field. But he was swimming against the stream here, and he started losing patience and so on.
Because he came out against these drugs, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a bigger subject than we can get into today, but I think that it's been fairly well established that the CIA was all over that. You had psychiatrist Jolyon West out in Los Angeles handing out LSD on the street corner practically.
Right.
And, Cameron up at McGill University. I remember I had on the late Jim Keith, who wrote some incredible books about this. And, Mind Control, World Control, and the MK Ultra, and all of this stuff.
Whatever happened to Cameron? He was pretty big up through the 1950s, and
he was doing the most ghoulish experiments on people. And many of them unsuspecting. They would go to him for regular conventional psychiatric advice, and they end up getting trapped into this. Just him, and there's a couple of others. And Jim Keith did a lot to expose this. I had him on my show. I wish I had tapes of that, because this is before the days of tapes. He also wrote the great book, The Black Helicopters Over America. He wasn't a right-winger. He wasn't even a conspiracy guy. He was actually a pretty conventional reporter. He had a background in journalism. I will just put it this way. He died under mysterious circumstances. He was a young man, went into the hospital for a minor problem, never came out.
Yeah.
Now, don't know what happened, but he was going after some big, and he was uncovering some major things going on in the establishment, especially with this issue of CIA drug use and mind control and experiments, and their intersection with some of the major political figures and cultural figures. And so I think that, what your friend came up against was that establishment. It's the same thing doctors came up against when they questioned the COVID jab.
Yeah.
Any doctor who questioned that, and these are amongst the most respected people in this country, people who are on the front lines of handling COVID, they had their careers damaged at some level, including attempts to put them in prison.
So isn't it funny that we haven't progressed at all? How is this any different from the days of Ignaz Semmelweis, who suggested that surgeons should wash their hands first?
Right.
And he was marginalized and so on and so forth. I mean, the whole field of medicine should be doing penance until eternity, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah.
But, and as I mentioned in the article, some people didn't like this. It's no accident that some of Hitler's biggest early supporters were doctors. All right?
Yeah.
That's the fact.
Doctors and college students.
Yes.
Exactly. I mean, that was the base for the Nazi movement. It's the same base as the communists had. Intellectuals, people who who don't really have a job. People like my professor, frankly, at ASU. I mean, this guy is about as lunatic as anyone I've seen, and openly so. He said that one of the things he wants the students to do is to have a Zoom meeting with him at some point. I'm going to hold mine off until toward the end of the course, only because I want to get a couple of things done. I want to show that I've done the readings, I've taken the tests, just so I have that under my belt. And then I'm going to have it out and go over these things with him, because, this is, it strikes me as being a lot of these types, they are what I would call hothouse flowers. They're not used to being outside of a very controlled environment where they thrive. But once you go outside that hothouse, they wilt. I remember this when I used to do talk radio, and I'd have them on my show. I had several instances where I'd have like this major liberal author who would say these crazy things in their book. I would read that back to them, and they'd have a meltdown. And I'm like, look, It's your book here. Well, it's out of context. Fine. Put it into context then for me. We have an hour here. Let's hear the context. Oh, they'd have a complete meltdown.
Yeah.
And I was reading back. I wasn't even commenting. I was just simply, page 9, chapter 2, you say blah, blah, blah. They would absolutely, oh, I never said this. Really? I mean, so, I mean, he reminds me of that type. He's going to have a complete meltdown if I talk to him even slightly.
Okay, so, but look at it from the other point of view. What's wrong with people, kids, students, that willingly accept all this crap?
They are, I know it's an old-fashioned word, but it's brainwashed from an early age. Their parents accepted it. This is already generational. This is why so many of these people are now voting for, communistic socialists for office. Even though I have to say, I am really pleased that scumbag Vindman was kicked out in Florida. Oh, man.
And he was supposed to be the intelligent choice, right?
He was one of the worst, the most arrogant. First of all, he comes up and he lies about Trump. He betrays Trump. Well, he's part of the administration. And he shows up with a military suit to testify. One of the worst people. I mean, just an absolutely horrendous individual. One of the masterminds of the whole perfect phone call impeachment. He's gone. And I'm glad he is. The woman that beat him is crazy and a leftist, but I'm glad she won because I mean, this is he's been relegated to where he belongs, the ash bins of history, and she will be.
Unfortunately, he's still going to be around. There'll be some.
Oh yeah, he'll probably go on work on MSNBC.
That takes this guy.
Yeah.
And it's like they never go away. They never go away. And then 30 years from now, you'll be reading, oh, here's this guy. He's 85, 90 years old now, and he's still around. So it's.
Right. I mean, they'll never go. It's like Fidel Castro. They'll never go. They last forever. People like that have long lives. They thrive on this kind of like hatred, really.
Well, I mean, my explanation for that was always that they've been given so many chances to repent. And finally, God just pulls the plug. Well, when you're 91 years old, like with Harry Blackman and so on.
It's enough already.
So, we gave you a shot here, but you blew it. And so I have to tell you, though, on that current piece of mine, I have got some let's say nasty emails that people didn't like, that I was attacking the conventional wisdom. I think the line that upset a lot of people was when I was talking about the psychiatrist that took care of Lindsay Clancy. I said, how come they just didn't, quote, believe all women and take this wrong and just commit her? And
exactly. I mean, or just somehow, I mean, cut these drugs. It didn't help her, obviously. Because
you've got to know that before she was prescribed all this stuff, she had to be saying to the shrink, hey, I have this idea, I want to kill my kids and so on. Oh, okay. Well, we'll give you some more pills. Maybe at some point.
Am I wrong to know? I don't know if this is a fact. Maybe you do, but I think that by law, a therapist has to report that. If somebody says, I want to kill somebody.
Very, very gray area. Discretion of the doctor, doctor-patient confidentiality.
But if somebody is openly suggesting that they want to commit murder, I think that there are laws in place which say that they have to report that, not to the police, but they have to tell somebody. There has to be a record kept.
But it's at the judgment of the physician. And in fact, I saw a video where this one psychiatrist named Dr. Tufts, after the university, was being questioned in the trial. And she was, first of all, she wasn't very smart, surprised. And the defense was saying, well, are you an expert on postpartum depression? As she billed herself. And the defense guy says, well, you had experience for 30 days after your psychiatric residency. You worked on some program with postpartum depression women. That makes you an expert. Well, it depends on what your definition of expert is. I thought, holy cow.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Yeah.
Dear Lord. I mean, this is, yeah.
No. And it's like anytime you get into these articles and you do enough research, your head explodes because you can write a 5,000 word piece on everything. Which obviously you're not going to do, no one will read it, but the background is so depressing, and this is almost universally true. If you talk about, the typical example I always used to use was, no matter how bad you think Franklin Roosevelt was, you look into it more, and as you find more and more and more, and it's like any of these people. I'm sure if I did more research on all these doctors she went to, it would blow your mind. But like, what's the point? How many examples do you have to cite?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a very corrupted institution, the entire medical world. I mean, there's still some good ones out there, fortunately, but just in this case, I mean, this woman was not well served. And this is in Boston. You'd think it would be better. But, it's sad.
Well, you have all these major hospitals and med schools in Boston, but maybe that's the problem, that you have all this, quote, expertise. And, what's great is you go to these websites, and here is the one doctor that prescribed her all these things. She wasn't the only one, but she was the biggest offender. And she's got this glowing write-up on the website of the medical group she's with.
Right.
And it's like, oh my God, But like, what are you going to do? She's in the group, and that's that.
Yeah.
But it's, I don't know. There's just something in the medical profession. My son's a doctor. I've got a number of friends who are doctors. And I got to tell you, Chuck, they hate doctors.
Yeah, and I could just tell you in my own experience, when I need to see a doctor, and I do need to see them more now that I'm older, I prefer seeing someone with a few gray hairs. Let's just put it that way. Right? I mean, there's some of these people. This one doctor, he looked like he was 16 years old, and he was as dumb as a brick. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I want to see somebody who was a little been out in the world a while, has had some patience, has some experience,
right?
And it's just a general rule of thumb that at least there's a certain gravitas to them. But I think that the entire industry was very severely compromised by COVID and by the jab, including my own doctor at Mass General, who I really like, and who's a fairly young woman, and who at the beginning of the pandemic, she had a great sense of humor. We shared a lot of laughs about, I have patients who will never go outside again, and the mass is craziness. But then as things progressed, she lost her sense of humor.
Yeah.
Especially when I started to ask questions about, the jab and whatnot. No, she was no longer laughing, because she had to play ball with this establishment to keep her license.
Well, and not only she had to play ball, she realized, in the famous words that, God, I love this, when Candice Bergen said this, she was trying to be the perfect actress and so on. And then she made a movie called The Adventurers, and she was interviewed, and she said, selling out was a whole lot easier than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And there you go. And I'm sure she was unhappy with herself. But I mean, imagine you go into this thing, you want to heal people and so on.
Yeah.
Then you
confront a big investment in it. She It takes 8 years to become a doctor with your internship, and you have a lot of skin in the game, and they hold that this is the problem with government involvement in medicine. The establishment has made decisions going back to the Flexner Report of 1910, where there's only a certain type of medicine that is going to be practiced, and that for you to get to that, they control the entry to gate, the credentialing and the schools. And if you don't play ball with that, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So you're in that system, and you kind of want to continue with it, even if you disagree. That's what happened to my doctor. She knew damn well that this COVID thing was a crock of bull, and we had talked about that. But she had to change her tune, and she no longer was so friendly to me anymore after a while because of this.
I'll tell you, the worst example of this that I experienced, and you talk about, well, you're older, you go to doctors more. Well, that applies to me maybe more than you. The worst offenders of this were the cardiologists.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They were 1,000% pro-vax and pro-vax and pro-vax.
And this is the worst case of getting the vax, by the way, isn't it?
Okay, but that's what happened. When the returns came in with the myocarditis, pericarditis, they didn't say, don't get the vax. They just shut up. So it was unbelievable, Chuck. They were whispering in your ear every 5 seconds, get the vax. You come to the next appointment, radio silence.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's like no comment. Yeah. And, if you press the matter, they're like, well, it's up to you. So, yeah, I mean, it's doctors have completely lost their independence, their ability to actually do medicine, in the real sense. Anyways, so Mike, a good article.
Well, thank you.
About Lindsay Clinton. Yeah. Very
well, I mean, hopefully people will click on that roller derby link at the very end. I thought that was good. I mean, it's sort of humorous thing, but it was, I bring up the WNBA and the cat fights, and the fact that 60% of the viewership of the WNBA is men, so they can watch the cat fights. All right, it was better in roller derby, But,
yeah, I mean that is part of it, I guess. I mean that's one of the appeals of hockey, I think. Also,
yeah,
people love. You see these two guys that they take off the armor and they just start duking it out. I mean, that's part of the game, and I actually think they probably encourage that a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of just expected.
Well, what was your first clue when they have a different penalty between fighting or drawing blood? Okay, well, no, fighting's bad, but if you actually hurt the guy, that's really bad. So.
No, exactly. It's just a little showmanship. They want to have a little action to keep people engaged. Anyway, so Mike, but as always, great show.
Well,
by the way, we didn't talk about the upcoming midterms. Just briefly, what do you how do you see things? Do you think Trump's going to? I mean, I see these polls.
Well, I mean, what immediately came out in the last couple of weeks that you and I have known forever is so many fake polls, right?
Yes, especially in Los Angeles.
There was even a story in the LA Times. This poll came out. It started to be Karen Bass against this, what's her name, Indian councilwoman. And this poll came out and said, well, Karen Bass is way, way, way ahead. So even the Times had to admit that the poll was fake. And there's all these fake polls. So who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? Meanwhile, she's getting like matching funds from the state. Every time she's bragging on a commercial, give me $5 and the state will match it, quadruple it. How is it that taxpayer money is going to support a left-wing candidate?
Well, that's you have a one-party state.
That's outrageous. I mean, if I was a taxpayer in California, I don't care who it is. I don't want my taxpayer money to go to any candidate, let alone a left-winger like her. That's ridiculous, but whatever. I hope somebody challenges that and I also hope somebody challenges the new law just being signed in Sacramento, the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Whatever happened to the ACLU and the First Amendment? You're telling us that a citizen reporter can't cover a story?
Well, come on, the ACLU has been on the wrong side of every issue since it was founded in the 1930s by Roger.
They like to claim that free speech is their major thing.
Never.
I know that, but I mean, somebody should call them out, because here you have a law saying that journalists aren't allowed to cover corruption in state government, or they could get fined and possibly jailed. I mean, what kind of I mean, this is extreme even for California.
Well, I don't think much is going to happen with that, but it's, what can I say?
It's supported by the wife of the Attorney General, Bonta.
Oh, yeah, he's another one. He's the poster boy.
But she's in the state assembly, and she's sponsoring this bill, which is euphemistically being called the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Yeah. In other words, if you're an independent journalist who goes into studying state corruption in terms of these billions of dollars going to phony, daycare centers and hospices, you can end up being in trouble. You could end up getting fined and charged and of committing a felony. Just to show how far things have gone. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. The best thing that ever happened to Sacramento was the gold rush, and it was downhill from there. And the only solace we get living in better parts of the state is that those poor bastards actually have to live in Sacramento. God bless.
Okay. So, all right, Mike. So I'll talk to you next week.
So we're on at usual, or
usual Monday. Yep.
All right. We will see you then.
Thanks a lot. Okay.